Thank you for joining us for a new episode of All Allowed Nevada, the ultimate podcast for quick insights into Nevada's judicial education. I'm Anne-Marie Mayu, your host, proudly representing the Supreme Court of Nevada, Administrative Office of the Courts, Judicial Branch Training Unit. And today we are going to be exploring succession in our courts. And I'm delighted to welcome our esteemed guest, Max Cortez, who is our first Judicial District Court Administrator. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Max.
I'm very happy to be here.
I know that the succession planning is a near and dear subject for you.
It is something that I lose a lot of sleep over.
Oh, don't do that. Don't lose sleep over that. Let's pick your brain. Can you provide an overview of what succession planning entails, especially in the context of the Nevada Judiciary?
So how we have approached succession planning at the courts here in Carson City is we have really looked at the number of employees that we have that will be retiring in the next, 3 to 5 years. We actually have been succession planning for quite a while because we had significant retirements last year. We had our district court supervisor who had 28 years of service retire.
Wow.
Our Justice Court Supervisor retired after 30 years of service. Our Fiscal Services Manager after 30 years of service. So really key leadership positions that thankfully we knew that they were going to be retiring. Sometimes you don't know, but thankfully they did share that with us, and so we were able to plan.
Explain how the succession planning contribute to the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the Nevada Judiciary and court operations.
So as I mentioned, because those were key positions and we knew we had some time to plan for that, and like my position, I plan to retire in 5 years, so we were already starting succession planning for that. Yes. But we identified, our talent within the court, and then we started providing training for those individuals so that they can be ready to be successful in those positions. And that's where it's really imperative, I believe, and have such a passion for professional development, because I believe that you need to identify the talent, you need to know your employees' strengths, and then you need to see, where it is that they need to develop so that they can move up to the next level. And so, those three key positions that I discussed, they're positions that are not only essential, but they're critical to court operations. So we started identifying our talent, providing trainings. And training is one thing, but you also need a coach. So we do a lot of coaching with our employees. If it's a project that we're working on, we're having them exposed to it so that they can get an understanding. If it's a contract that we're working on, if it's legislation, we're having them partake so they can start developing those skills and understanding, why, what, how, right?
Right.
And so that way we're setting them up for success, and we're not saying, okay, you're taking over this position in 30 days and here's what you have to do, right? No, we're plotting for their success, and we're training slowly so that they can get enough experience so that when they lead into those positions, they can do it effectively and they can be set up for success. And then that in turn is hopefully a seamless transition, so that not only they feel confident in their new role as leaders, but the staff has continuity, and then in turn, better service because everything is seamless. So that's how we've approached succession planning. Training, identifying the weaknesses, or I would like to say areas for development, for further development, and then coaching. Coaching is, you can't do enough of that. And I just did that last week with a new supervisor, and, coming in and, it was a disciplinary action. So I said, okay, I'm the employee. You give me the discipline. And, how do you approach it? And we tweak, words. And then they go and they do it, and then they come back, and I said, okay, what worked? What could you do better next time? And then we have a great discussion about that. So I think for me, that's the best way to approach succession planning, is to, know your employees, kind of have an idea when they're going to retire. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes you do. And then start identifying your talent within your court, and then start training. And it's a priority. Training sometimes takes a back seat because it's time consuming. Yes. But if you're going to succession plan and you're going to do it effectively, and that's what your end goal is, right? You want to make sure that you're setting up the court for the future. So if you want to do that effectively, then you have to plan, and you have to stick to your plan, and you have to make it a priority. And that includes funding, which is very scarce sometimes. So in our succession planning, before we even started the training and all of that, we had to get approval, right, from our judges. And so I'm in a unique situation because I have 5 judicial officers. I'm in the First Judicial District Court, as you mentioned, but I also am the court administrator for the Justice Municipal Court, and I also assist the juvenile court. So with that, we have a meeting and we talk about, succession planning, personnel issues, concerns, and then we find the right training and then say, okay, this is what we want to train on, and this is the cost, and this is how we're going to pay for it. And a lot of times I believe that the judges, they're thinking about it too. They do think about, they know that an employee has been there 26 years, and they know that employee is going to be retiring. And I believe it makes them feel confident that our court is not going to in any way suffer because somebody leaves. Because as you know, when someone walks out the door, there goes all that knowledge, right?
Oh, yeah. And you just can't get that back.
And you can't download it.
No, you can't.
So that's one of the areas that I think is key when you are speaking with your judges, is saying, they know so much because they've been here for so long. And many courts are different, but in my world, whenever we want to replace a position, we don't get a lot of time to do that. So we may get 2 weeks overlap for someone to be promoted. But other than that, we don't get a lot of time for that. So, and that's why it's so critical to know, if that individual is leaving, to start that planning way before that time.
Right. If
you can, and if you know. And for instance, in my position, we recently were very lucky to be able to have a court administrator position, that we were finally able to secure that position for the courts. And so that individual who's in that position, who's Cody Drews, he's slated to take over. So he is going to ICM. So that's kind of a building, like a foundation, but it's even more than that. It's networking. It's the ability to really kind of dive into court leadership. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's the first building block. And then, of course, coaching and having him experience all the day-to-day things that I do and take responsibilities for other areas. But, we've got 5 years. Hopefully he stays. But we've got 5 years to work on all of those areas. Right. And I feel that you need that time. You really do need time if you're able to identify those individuals who are leaving. And, if they are open and they do share their plans with you, you then can start planning on, who should be their succession in their position. So I talked about funding because that is a critical piece. We don't have a lot of that.
Yes.
And so we do use our court restricted funds. We did partner this last Friday. We had a training. It was a 6-hour training for our leaders, and we were able to pull funds through juvenile services. They had some money. So, we're talking to them saying, hey, we want to put on a 6-hour training on, meeting deadlines and organization and priorities. And you have staff too. Do you have money? And so we're pulling funds together so that we can, pay for the instructor to come out. And this particular training we did off-site outside of the court, which I also believe is I think you really need to be intentional with your training. So if you are going to train, if it's possible to have them offsite so that they can concentrate on the training, so that they're not getting phone calls or they're not getting interrupted, or they can be present in the moment,
right, focused. Right.
And so then we brought in lunch, so then we could kind of have a team building and talk to everyone, because we're so busy. Sometimes you don't have time for that. So it's training, but it's also an opportunity to get to know our peers and colleagues. And it was a pretty successful training. I'm really happy with it.
Well, and the networking is such a huge piece of working in the Nevada Judiciary anyway, that it definitely is more beneficial to set your trainings up so that your participants can network. We have definitely found that with the judges, and whenever we pick a venue for them, we are very strategic. So you're right. It should be as far away from their computers as possible. So are there any specific laws that you know of or regulations in Nevada governing succession planning in courts? Like, does the First Judicial District do they have a policy procedure of succession planning, or is this you just being the incredible court administrator that you are?
I'll pay you later.
That you've jumped in and you've started this?
No, we don't have a per se policy. We do use a spreadsheet, and what we do is we identify all of our court key leadership positions. So, for example, my position, court administrator, assistant court administrator, our district court supervisor, justice court supervisor, and then we have senior clerks in each of the operations. Okay. We have a court technology coordinator as well, and then our budget fiscal services manager. And so we identify our key leadership team. It's our leadership team. And then we identify what training they need. So, you have your basics, your FMLA, your workers' comp. What do you do when you have employees that face those issues? And so we really maximize our city. Carson City has an HR department, and so they provide some of those services for free. So We're not paying for those.
There you go.
So we identify, okay, we need FMLA, we need workers' comp, but then over and above, what do we need? So we've identified we need leadership training. We need how to manage deadlines, priorities, organization, of course. The last training we did was kind of a really cute title. It was Be the Supervisor Employees Want to Follow. Oh. And so we had an instructor that came from Kansas City, and it was the weekend of the Super Bowl. So that was pretty fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we really kind of tortured him a little bit. And then he won, and so he had a last laugh. But anyway, so we did that training. We also are working in September enhancing communication skills, because you can't have too much of that.
Right.
And with enhancing communication skills, we're identifying not just our key leadership team, but we're identifying our other line staff that need training, because we communicate for a living. We're public servants. We're providing that service, so we need to know how to talk. Right. Right?
There's so many aspects to not only your job, but being a clerk as well, and dealing with the public. You've got to have those skills. I mean, I don't think really the general community understands the amount of knowledge that you have to really have to work in a court system.
Yes, I believe that managing emotions under pressure and critical thinking are two classes that are so important, but those you could do once a year. Sure. You really could reinforce and, learn new techniques. We had a meeting with our emergency management director for the city, and so he said he may have those classes that, again, free. Nice. So it's looking at those opportunities that may be in your city, county, locale that you can leverage so that you're not always out of pocket. And then you can do more training if you can find it for free.
And those that are eager to learn, I would imagine, would get your attention.
You're looking for that total package in an employee. Right. You're looking at that professionalism, reliability, their ability to do their jobs effectively with minimal errors, their assertiveness. Are they timid? Are they able to talk to judges? Are they able to deal with somebody at the counter, for instance, who's crying and irate? Are they able to have those skills to de-escalate the situation? Because, in my job, I de-escalate with customers, but I also can at times de-escalate with my bosses or with supervisors or whatnot.
Sure.
So, you are looking at, kind of little glimpses, do they have the skill? Is that something that you can then develop further?
Right.
And so absolutely knowing your people, knowing their strengths, and knowing their areas for development is crucial.
Well, what are some common challenges or obstacles that the court professionals may encounter when implementing succession planning? We've already talked about a budget, so we know that that's a big one. Always.
Yeah. One of I talk to my people all the time and say, I know we're going to do training. We're going to do training about 6-7 times this year. I have about 3 or 4 staff going to ICM in Vegas. And sometimes the response I receive is, gosh, I have so much work. I have so much work to do. And then, 6 hours away from my desk. I believe that when you want the best for your court, and you want it to succeed, you have to make training a priority. And you have to stress how important the training is. And I believe that you have to walk the talk. So I sit in those trainings.
Good for you.
I don't just, you have to go to this. No, I'm there too. And I'm going to participate. And I believe that through that leadership, if it's so important to me that you go and I'm going too, then, we're going to grow together, because just because you're a court administrator, you don't know everything, and you can always fine tune your skills. And so I think it's incredibly important to walk the talk. The other thing that we do, and which I think is, and I've been guilty of this in my past as well, is you go to a training and then you get a handbook or you get a one-page leaflet or tips, and then it goes on the shelf and starts collecting dust. You don't open that training up again. And so what I plan to do in our next leadership team meeting is to ask them, what was some of your takeaways? Can you take away 1 or 2 things that you think as a team we can implement in the court? And I think that's important, because you can go to training, right? But you really need to identify the things that you are going to take the time to implement in your daily, work life. And maybe it's not daily, maybe it's weekly, but not just to go to training to say, okay, I checked that box, I went to that training. Right. Really, you put in what you get out. And so it's important when you're professionally developing individuals that you follow up as a leader. I sent you to this training. What did you get back? What can we implement? If it's be the supervisor, employees want to follow the one that we did. I plan to talk to the supervisors. What can we do that we learned that's effective to work with your team? What can we do together? Or, what do you plan to do? I think that follow-up is critical, because pay a lot for training. You want to use it, right?
Right. And that also has a lot to do with the succession planning, because you coach, this person that you see maybe taking your place, and you want to then bring it full circle, bring it back around for them. So that's definitely true. So I think it sounds to me like the challenges are certainly the budget, time, always, right? And then maybe depending on, how enthusiastic the leaders are about or involved or not. And just that support, that it sounds like it's important to definitely keep going. Are there any unique considerations or factors that court professionals should keep in mind during the succession planning process? Is there like one or 2 tips that you can think of?
I really think having open, honest communication with your leaders, your leadership team, that's what I call them. My supervisors, managers, they're all leaders. They're my team. Couldn't do the job without them. So if they are listening, I am going to put a plug in for them. But I think it's critical to know what their goals are, and having that honest communication about, are they happy working for the court? Do they see themselves retiring from the court? Are they looking at other areas of the court? I find myself in that unique position. I think there's only one other court in the state that has a consolidated administration. But with that, it's unique because it gives you some opportunities, because if you have someone that's working in the justice court, and I have one employee that has worked in all of the courts, and also another agency that's affiliated with the court, and she's fabulous.
Yeah.
And so she's got an incredible foundation. So having that honest communication and just saying, really diving into where do they see themselves, what are their plans, what are they interested in, and then making time to make it happen for them, because you have to put that action after your words. You can say all the things, people want to hear, but that action is what makes things, make it successful, I believe, because you're able to then say, okay, you want to, move up. So let's see what you need to do that. Where are the areas that you feel that you need to work on? And having that, again, you have to build that trust relationship with the employee.
Sure.
Before you get there. But I've been fortunate. I have a great team, and we have those communications, and then we work towards that action plan, right?
Yeah. And making that a priority, I think that's really important. Do you have like a specific schedule that you follow with those that you think might be a potential leader in the courts, or? So right now we have senior clerks that are slated to take over as supervisors, and they are the supervisors of the operation. So in district court, we have a district court clerk's office. The supervisor is, for the lack of a better term, is the manager of the operations, but their title is supervisor. It's a huge piece.
It's a huge leadership position. So our senior clerk is slated to take that over, is kind of in training, right?
Okay.
And so because of that, we provide her with the opportunities to learn how to write evaluations. She may not write them, and it may not be the one that's presented to the employee, but it's practice. It's practice on how to write evaluations. Wow. And so she's able to see, the wording, and the supervisors always laugh because I always say this: your most challenging employees make you better supervisors. So if you have all wonderful employees, then you really don't hone in your skills. So with our seniors, that's just the opportunity for them to grow. So if there's a, written discipline, they're partaking not only in the writing to see how it's written, but also in meeting with the employee and the supervisor, so that they may just be there and not say very much, but they're able to observe.
While we pause for a brief commercial break, I'd like to make a request to our audience. All Allow It Nevada isn't exclusively a certified legal education podcast. It's designed to be inclusive for everyone. Our aim is to connect with communities and provide insightful perspectives on the Nevada Judiciary. If you find these episodes enjoyable, kindly share their experience with your friends and family. Your support is greatly appreciated. Probably the best way to think about how it can be effective, succession planning, is to think about if you don't have the succession planning, how much the court would just fall apart. Coming from, someone in the public coming up to the counter and having to, talk to someone who hasn't had the training and isn't sure what they're doing. And then, take it there next to the top. I could imagine that would just show very quickly, and frustration would run high.
Yeah, and in my past, I worked in California, and I worked for a couple of different courts there. And, you can learn from your leadership. You learn good things, and you learn things that maybe I'm not going to do that whenever I make it to that level, right?
Right.
And so it's good takeaways. Like I said about challenging employees, they make you better supervisors. If you have a leader that maybe is not good in certain areas, you learn what not to do. And then, as you're saying, the effects of, not planning, not succession planning, not training. And unfortunately, I have worked under that leadership in California. And it's it doesn't feel good. And I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons why I moved to Nevada, just because I could no longer work under that leadership. It was chaos. And it has a trickle-down effect. And not only that, when as court leaders, when we don't train staff and we don't prepare them, we're really doing a disservice to the public.
Absolutely, yes.
And so keeping that in mind, I see that as part of my job. That is a critical piece of why I was hired, and what I do is to make sure that the court runs as smoothly as possible, right?
Yes.
And so with that is to have the best talent, the best staff. But in order for them to be the best, they have to have the tools, and you have to provide them. You have to. If you don't provide them, you're not going to get the best. You're going to get mediocre.
So let's kind of pull the judges into this a little bit. Can you give us, an idea of how they can help with the succession planning? What do our judges need to do to be supportive of that process in their courts?
Just say yes.
That's awesome. You'll handle the rest.
Yeah, I think that the judges, they understand that training and succession planning, the bottom line is going to be the best for the court, right? They know that. That's not rocket science. They get it. It's just really saying yes to, they need to know what type of training that's going to be provided and the cost. And I usually tell them, this is the training, this is how many individuals that we're going to have at the training, and then I'll divide it. Okay, if we were to send someone to out of state or in state and put them in a hotel, get them a car, per diem, it's going to cost X, and I can do this on site and have 20 staff come, and it's going to cost X. So it's more bang for your buck, and staff are here. And so it's presentation, but also identifying the types of courses that, of course, you're going to train on things that are relatable to the court, and then, penciling it out and presenting it to them.
Yes. And all of that is important, and getting their support and buy-in is probably number one on your list. So are there any emerging trends or developments in succession planning within the legal profession that court professionals should be aware of?
I think what we've identified, not with our leadership team, but with recruiting our line staff. So when I say that, you were talking about our front counter entry-level positions. What we've noticed is when we're looking at applicants, they tend to have a lot of jobs on their applications. Years past, you may have an individual that's been at the job for 10, 12 years. Now, they may have, 3 jobs in the first year. And when we started seeing that, we immediately kind of took that as a negative, right? We thought, wow, this person kind of jumps around a lot. But that is the trend. Individuals don't stay in positions for very long. So you need to identify the talent, the individuals that are a good fit for your court, and then you need to try to keep them. And the way you try to keep them is, some of it is monetary because of inflation now, but a lot of it is opportunity. Is the work that I'm doing, does someone care about it? Is someone giving me that feedback? Right. Am I have the opportunity to advance in the organization? And having those conversations, we're a small court, so our leadership team doesn't, as I said, we have had some individuals that have been there 30 years, 28 years. So it's not like they're leaving in 6 months and, you're the next person in line to get that position.
Right.
So, but trying to make their positions interesting enough to where they will stay and they will know that at some point, people do leave and you will have an opportunity. I'm a big believer in cross-training. So I worked at a front counter at a court in 1992. Just don't start doing the math. That's where I started. And I didn't have a supervisor at that time that did a lot of cross training. So you did the counter, you stayed there, until somebody retired or left. We don't do that in Carson. We really identify those individuals that are at the counter in our district court. We have those individuals cross-train, and they do the lighter calendars. Like we have a drug court calendar, an arraignment calendar. They can step in, and we can start cross-training them. Because if you have ever worked at a court and you've ever worked at the counter, let me tell you, those counter staff, they earn their money.
Yes,
it is a challenge. So you need to keep that spice in their job. It's important, I believe, that you have that talent there. So you're not waiting until somebody leaves to say, okay, now this individual has a opportunity to learn how to clerk in a courtroom. You're already exposing them to that. And you may have individuals that say, oh my gosh, I do not want to do that. I feel like I'm in the limelight. I do not want to work next to the judge. I just want to be at the counter. And that's fine. But now you know that. And you're not trying to mold somebody into a position that it's not going to work for them. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be successful. Because if you're not happy, you're not going to be successful. So we try to expose our counter staff to the courtroom so that we can, like I said, break up the monotony, give them something to aspire to. And they really enjoy it. And when you have somebody who is out or ill, you can use that counter staff to fill in the gaps.
That's just good planning on your part, for sure. How can court professionals adapt their succession plans to accommodate changes in technology, demographics, or other factors? I mean, how does the technology affect your courts like this? It's constantly changing.
Right now in our justice court, our court counter staff, they're using 6 different applications to do their job.
I've heard whispers of that kind of stuff happening. Yes. That's tough.
It's very tough. And it's not only tough when you're looking at accuracy and the ability for employees to retain and know how to access each application and do it correctly. I admire them. I don't know if I could work the counter anymore. I mean, I really admire their ability to maneuver through, different technology. And in Carson, our staff, like rural courts, were very similar, but unlike larger courts, we're very different. So in your larger courts, you may have a civil division, a family law division, a business law division, criminal division. And so your clerks get very specialized in those areas. In Carson, they got to do everything. And like our rural courts, something comes to the counter, it can be in our justice court, a small claims eviction, criminal, and that clerk has to know everything.
Right.
And so it makes them even more valuable because they're able to retain and do the job.
Yeah.
I did want to say something about our leadership team. So I think it's incredibly important, and I believe most court administrators do this because they do know the value. It's incredibly important to have a real diverse leadership team. So you don't have a bunch of yes people. You have people that are very comfortable. And of course, they have to have that comfort with you, but the ability to have those relationships where they, come in your office, shut the door and say, I may not agree with this, or I may not, giving you really the truth of whatever it is, and being open to receiving that and maybe changing directions because maybe it's not your idea. Maybe your idea wasn't the best idea. And so I think when you're looking at leadership teams and your line staff, that you do have diversity. And that's not, I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about how people see the world. Are they, introverts, extroverts? Are they willing to be open and provide information? So I just think, having individuals that can feel safe and confident enough to give you that feedback, because when you do have that diversity in your leadership teams, you get a richer product, whatever that is, whether it's a procedure, a process, whatever it is, you get that richer product because you don't have just a bunch of people saying yes because they don't want to disagree with you.
Or this is how we've always done it, so this is how we're going to continue to do it. And I think it's just, I agree with you 100%. And sometimes it's hard to hear, but to have a different perspective is really valuable.
It is. And, one thing that I use, I almost don't want to say this, but I will. One thing that I do use on occasion, if the situation warrants it, with my bosses, with partnerships like we have with different agencies, and with, of course, staff, is, okay, this may sound too scary, right, to do a deep dive. Let's pilot it for 3 months. Or let's pilot it for 6 months. Let's see how it goes. So, we're going to test it, but you're not really fully committing, right? Mm-hmm. So that's sometimes when the situation comes up where it may be a huge change from what we're doing. And you may have that feeling of, well, we've always done it this way. Well, okay, you have, but let's pilot. Let's see. And then, let's bring you to the table and talk about how we can do better or go back to what we were doing.
Right.
So I think sometimes it's important to not push people into, what you want and give them, it's kind of baby steps, let's pilot, let's check it out. But with that, being willing to say, okay, this is why it didn't work, and then being willing and not having that big ego to say, no, I just want to do it because it was my idea and I want it done, right? Right? And so, you have to put the ego at the door because ultimately you want the best product, you want the best process. And so in order to get there, you need others and you need to be able to shelf your ego. Yeah.
Well, and getting to that best practice isn't just the best practice is my idea. That's always going to be, that's not the way that works. The best practice, as you said, is going to be scientifically. Let's come up with some ideas. Let's come up with some different ways and let's try it out.
Yeah. I always say, let's tweak it. Yeah. We'll tweak it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's just to learn that, in fact, what we were doing was the best practice, that's okay too. Mm-hmm. That's okay too. So this has been a very, just a big conversation with a lot of information. But is there anything else that we didn't touch on with the succession planning of the courts that you'd like to mention before we close out?
So someone took a chance on me in 1992. I tested for the San Jose Municipal Court. And at the time, I was working as a file clerk in the DA's office. And so I think you can identify people in your courts that maybe you don't envision they're going to be a court administrator, but maybe you're going to, work with them to a point where you're going to give them an opportunity and they'll be a counter clerk or a court clerk. And then based on their own aspirations, my aspiration was always to be a court administrator. So I went back to school and attended school and had obtained my 2 degrees, my BA and master's. But I believe that you don't shut the door on someone because they don't have the degree. I think if you know your people and you can identify those strengths and spend the time to develop them, there's diamonds in the rough. I really believe that.
I think that's true. I've experienced that too. So that's very, very good advice. Thank you. Well, we just want to share a big appreciation to you, Max, for coming in, and to everyone who has tuned into this podcast. And before we wrap up, here are a couple important reminders. For continuing legal education, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email that to jepodcast@nbcourts.nv.gov. In addition, if you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we always welcome your input. You can email all of that information to jepodcast@nbcourts.nv.gov. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of I'll Allow It Nevada, released every first and third Friday of the month. This is Anne Marie Mayu signing off. Take care, Nevada.